Great pleasure this lovely June evening to have Beth Moulam, PLY, joining us. And I just wanted to do a little bit of an introduction. Beth describes herself as a lifelong dreamer and today is living her dream to the full. She's a graduate, a Paralympian, and lives independently in her own home and has a passion to empower others to fulfill their own and communication potential, which is one of the reasons why we thought Beth was the perfect person to have for this month where we're exploring self-advocacy. She is the product of both mainstream and special schools, becoming a boarder at the age of 14 due to her cerebral palsy, speech and hearing impairments. Everything takes longer. For instance, during her degree in social policy, it took her 7 years instead of the 4, but now she's studying for a master's on research full-time, which will take 3 years. Throughout her undergraduate degree, her hobby was playing bocce, which became more serious as the studies continued, and she was lucky enough, and it was so exciting that she was able to represent Great Britain in the Tokyo 2020, which actually happened in 21, Paralympics. But she's retired from elite sport, having achieved that dream. Outside of her studies in sport, is the world of augmentative and alternative communication has always been also another part of huge part of Beth's life. And she presented at her first international AAC conference at the very young age of 12 in 2006, and has gone on to speak around the world, delivering training and workshops on a wide array of topics from leadership skills, identity, self-advocacy and communication, to dreams, physical well-being and independent living. Beth is a trustee of Communication Matters and a patron on One Voice, and sits on the International Communication Rights Alliance Committee, an organisation which objectives is to opportunise, that's a very long word, the UN CRPD in relation to communication rights. And she's had the privilege of addressing the CRPD committee on the ICRA's behalf in August 2022 and March 2023. So thank you, Beth. we sometimes get an international crowd here, but I think tonight it's mainly UK based. But it gives me great pleasure to invite you to share with us your talk this evening, your presentation. Thank you so much.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
Please bear with me while I share my screen and we will be ready to start. Can I just check if you can hear me?
Yes.
Thank you to Miriam and Emma for inviting me tonight. What I'm sharing tonight is my lived experiences, so you might have different ways you have addressed some of the same challenges. Speaking up for ourselves so we can achieve what we want in life is a skill everyone needs to learn, not just those of us with disabilities. At its simplest level, self-advocacy is being able to communicate our needs, but we all know it isn't always as easy as it sounds. Sometimes the way forward is getting support from another person to help us express our views and wishes and help us stand up for our rights. When we do this, we are using an advocate. Speaking out as an advocate on behalf of others can be equally challenging. For instance, on 2 occasions I've addressed the United Nations Committee for People with Disabilities. Speakers have just 3 minutes, adjusted for an AAC user to 6 minutes. Imagine how carefully you need to craft your statement to advocate on how communication rights can be rolled out globally. The messaging on behalf of others had to be clear, easy to follow, and grounded in research. For many people, advocacy isn't something that just happens. It is a skill that develops through childhood, into teens, and then continues in adulthood. At the core of advocating for ourselves is communication. However, being able to communicate is only a part of the picture. We also need to develop the confidence to do this. Before we start, I wanted to say I'm happy to answer questions as we go tonight. If you have a question, please pop it into the chat. You will be muted when I'm speaking, but I'm hoping my presentation sparks a good discussion at the end. Let me share a story that illustrates what we are going to be covering tonight. When I was 15, my mum could no longer get me in and out of the bath safely. Plus, I wanted more independence. The occupational therapist was determined I was having a wet room. That was the local policy. She didn't listen to me, my mum, or my pediatrician on why I needed a bath. I was incensed. I knew I had the right to be heard. Trying to state my case verbally with my communication aid clearly wasn't working. So I handwrote a letter, which if you have seen my handwriting, you would know was a labor of love. I said I didn't believe I was being listened to. I gave the reasons why a shower was unsuitable for me. I stated the health and well-being benefits of a bath, including being able to have a greater level of independence. I copied the letter to the OT's boss, the pediatrician, and others, then sat back. The result was I got heard, and I got the bath I needed. I learned so much from this early success. I still use the same steps to achieve what I want today. My 5 steps are: be authentic, know your rights, demonstrate self-determination, communicate effectively, then be willing to learn by being reflective after each opportunity to self-advocate. I'm going to explain briefly what I mean using some real-life examples. Let's dive into tip number 1. Being authentic means being yourself, being real or true to yourself. which you might think sounds simple. To be ourselves, we need to be self-aware. It is about knowing who we are. This means having self-knowledge and understanding our personal identity. One of the things to understand is what we want for ourselves is not always what others might think we want. People often judge other people and make their minds up very quickly about what they think they see. The focus for this section is to think about who and what we are as individuals, not what others tell us we are. I love this picture because we can see that there is an older lady in a wheelchair, but when she sees herself, she doesn't see the chair. Instead, she sees herself as a graceful dancer. It makes the point beautifully that there are always different viewpoints of the same thing. What matters when we self-advocate is we know what we want from life or a given situation. This is not what others tell us we should do, or be, or have, or want. This is about our wishes and dreams, our views, our thoughts, and our feelings. Until we know ourselves and understand what we want, then it is impossible to share this with others. Over the years, we all learned lots about ourselves. I've been lucky that some of my learning about myself has come from structured activities. I've been a dreamer all my life. At the age of 6, I watched the Paralympics and knew then I wanted to represent my nation at the Paralympic Games. I had no idea what that sport would be, but it was still a goal. When I was 10, I found bocce, and as soon as I heard it was a Paralympic sport, I knew it was for me. I was going to give it a go. When I started playing, I lost every match, but I was determined to learn, train, and get better. At 12, when my mainstream secondary school said I would never be able to do sport, I just ignored them. I carried on anyway with the support of my parents and later my boarding school. Initially, bocce was for fun. I made friends, I had an outside interest, and I always looked forward to training and competing. When I went to university, I was close to stopping bocce, even though by then I was representing England. The academic work was relentless because it takes me so long to do everything. I was loving studying, but I couldn't do everything. Instead of giving up bocce, I went to talk to my supervisor about work-life balance and the need for me to do things other than just have my head in a book. Fortunately, she agreed, and with her support, I was able to extend my course by 100% extra time. This meant I could have a life that still included playing bocce. Once I got selected for Great Britain, it wasn't easy juggling being a dual career athlete, but the university academic team were on board and made things possible. So, By knowing what I wanted, I was able to successfully ask for the help and support I needed. Over time, I've developed a list of my strengths and areas for improvement. I don't like to call these weaknesses. These are just areas I haven't had time to work on yet. With the right support, we can all fulfill our own life potential. I've also done work around my identity. This means understanding who I am and how others might perceive me. This has really supported me to understand why what I want is not always the same as what those around me might think I want. Another task I do regularly is to make sure I stay true to myself. This in turn helps me stay in control. I often ask myself if I am achieving the things that give me balance in life. For instance, I love spending time by the sea. It makes me feel happy and peaceful. And I love having quiet space just for me daily. With a busy life, I need a self-advocate to make this happen. I mentioned dreaming, and I was lucky enough to go to a brilliant dreams workshop when I was 14 and learned how to make my dreams a reality. The process means understanding what you want, beginning with the end in mind, so knowing where you want to finish. Then working out the steps needed to make this happen before tackling these elements in bite-sized chunks. "15 years on, I still use these processes as part of a roadmap that has helped me achieve my goals and speak up for what I need. There isn't time to take you through those steps today. But what I would do is encourage everyone to have dreams or goals. These were my original dreams, and I found if you know what you want and don't want, then you can advocate for what you want out of life. This process is the reason I'm studying for a master's. I have my own home. I achieved my Paralympic dream. And I tried driving. That's step 1 in a nutshell. Be authentic. Know who you are and what you want. Once we know what we want, then we are ready to begin advocating for ourselves. I'm going to just look in the chat and see if we have any questions so far. Time to move on. Now we are going to discuss step 2. This section considers the importance of knowing our rights and doing our research. If we know our rights, this helps us manage our expectations of others and ourselves. Here we could talk about what the United Nations Convention of Rights of People with Disabilities says. We could focus on policy like the CARE Act. But I'm simply going to say these are underpinned by hearing our voices. It still doesn't always happen, but I am fully behind the sentiment that is often called "nothing about me," without me. What this means is that we all have the right to be included in any and every discussion and decision about us and our lives. Like everyone else, we deserve choices, and our voice needs to be heard. Whether this is a small thing or a massive life-changing event, we should expect that no one will be making any decision for us, either without our consent or active involvement in the process. This builds on knowing ourselves and being authentic about what we want. I'll just mention here that sometimes it can be hard when your emotions are running high, but for successful self-advocacy, there is also an expectation that you must manage yourself. The steps I'm talking about in this session have helped me remain in control. Getting what I want is easier when I remain calm, polite, and speak without a passionate rant or demonstrating anger. When I was 18, I was fortunate to be invited to join the European Network for Independent Living Young Leaders workshop. This was a full week in Strasbourg, which ended in us presenting to MEPs about what was needed to empower young disabled people to be independent. I came away inspired. At this stage, let me apologize for the rubbish photos in the next few slides. If I'd known in 2012 that I would still be using them today, I might have got better shots. I'd gone to the workshop being interested in policy for people with communication impairments. I was maybe a bit complacent about education, healthcare, social care, independent living, and transport. I knew things weren't perfect always here in the UK, but I was humbled to learn about the lives of other disabled young people across Europe. This made me even more determined to first fulfill my own potential and live independently, which I now do in my own home with 24/7 support. And second, to advocate for people who use or need augmentative and alternative communication resources. The aim of the workshop was to facilitate the self-empowerment of participants through peer-to-peer learning, recognition of the skills we had, and the skills we would need, and self-reflection. Some of the skills I learned through the COS leaders and working collaboratively with the other participants were ways to put forward my views and receive feedback from others. To take on board new and different ideas, even if I didn't always agree with other people's opinions. Learning this has been useful in life, not just for advocacy. Thirdly, the aim of the week was to develop our knowledge of human rights and their implications at grassroots level. Plus, for us to end the week with a training manual for other young leaders that would follow us. That week was only a start to what has become important to me in everyday life. Even before leaving the European Youth Centre, I was researching if there was a degree I could do that would extend my knowledge and understanding of the things I had learned. I felt for me to be viewed seriously by policymakers, I could not just rely on my lived experience. I needed to be able to put forward my ideas and those of others in an informed way. Hence, my love of social policy. That week really showed me what it meant to believe there should be nothing about me without me. On a day-to-day level, one, I'm not willing to let others take decisions for me or to speak on my behalf. If I am there, I'm going to do it for myself. My experience has shown me the importance of my own research, finding out about your rights, knowing what you want to achieve, then knowing what you can expect of others, and how that frames what you can expect of yourself. Let there be nothing about us without us. Without going into the nitty-gritty of policy and rights, does anyone have any questions before we move on?
Yeah, Miriam, we've just got your question in the chat box here, so Beth's just going to program an answer to that one.
Amazing. Do you want me to read it out for everyone?
Oh yeah, you can read it out.
So, because Beth, the two sections of your talk, you've already mentioned a couple of times when you were told at school you wouldn't be able to do sport, and initially it might be an issue around your progressing with your degree because of getting the work-life balance regarding your education and the sport. And I was just wondering, I'm sure there are other occasions when you've been faced with frustrating situations, other people's rudeness or ignorant comments. And I know that you said it's very important to keep your head together and be calm, etc. But I was just wondering, that's kind of a journey that people have to go on. And if you could explain some of the strategies that you employ when you come up against those frustrating situations.
Beth's just getting her answer ready now.
Thank you, Lily.
Wow.
It was frustrating, but I am very stubborn as this is a family trait. But in a nutshell, it is about being comfortable in my own skin and do what I wanted anyway and not allowing the word no to enter my vocabulary.
Thank you, Beth.
Mm.
That's very helpful. I'll
Yeah.
try and practice that too.
Really hard to it's really hard to do, but it's really worth it.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next area that I believe is important is self-determination, or making things happen your way. This is where I think the value of planning comes in. Being self-determined includes the topics we have already covered. Knowing yourself and knowing your rights. Here I'm going to talk about decision-making. From a young age, it was already clear to me that whilst I wanted to live independently, I would always need help around the clock. I knew what I wanted, but I was realistic that there were some things I wouldn't be able to do myself. Frankly, doing household chores are physically beyond me, but I know what standards I expect, and I can direct a personal assistant to do what I need. Being able to make your own decisions is important. Self-advocacy is, as we said earlier, about knowing our own mind and communicating what we want. When I arrived at university, I felt thrown in the deep end. Not only was I living completely independently for the first time in a new town, studying in a new place with new academic support. Then, I was also juggling managing a full 24/7 support team. I was determined to make it all work. But all of this together was quite overwhelming at times. I was also exhausted with the new challenges of my life. There was no one from school saying lights out, and no mum making sure my meals were on the table. Even if I awoke in the night, I had to tell people what I needed them to do. And training and managing a team of people was a whole different ballgame to anything I had previously experienced. If you are looking at moving to a new setting or entering a new stage in life, then what I learned the hard way is that it takes time and energy to advocate for yourself. I'd recommend starting to practice on the small decisions long before you need to do it in reality. Moving somewhere new means managing change, being resilient and determined if things don't always go quite how you expect, especially when leading a team. The good news is every disabled person I know has already developed some of these skills through experience. Because of our disabilities, we must constantly seek solutions to everyday things other people find easy. It means we are used to asking ourselves questions, to dealing with change and being creative in our problem solving. Don't doubt your ability, You already have a head start in self-determination. In the area of self-determination, one important thing is to both be ourselves and believe in ourselves. At 12, when my mainstream school said I couldn't do sport and I was unlikely to ever get any qualifications, I didn't give up. Try and know what you want and why. I found that by having a positive mindset, you can turn things that appear at first to be impossible into possibilities. If you believe in yourself, then there is always a way you can achieve. We can all fulfill our own potential. The life-changing big decisions are also important. One of my goals growing up was to be healthy, to be the best version of me I could be. I own my disability. This is what makes me, me. But what I really didn't like was that I was often hungry, tired, and ill, especially at school. The crunch point for me came when I was 18, and I just felt exhausted all the time in school. I spent a lot of time thinking about this and realized that I didn't like meal times. I had to feed myself. My food went cold. It tasted horrible. I ate slowly. Meal times were over before I had finished. Basically, I was underweight and always hungry. This often made me angry, so hungry and angry. I looked around at some of the disabled adults I knew well and saw that they had helped to eat. I also knew in school holidays and weekends I ate better. This was partly because I was less tired, and partially because my parents or personal assistant would help. I took a decision that for day-to-day life I wanted to be fed. Now that's a big step, but one I felt would be right for me. Yet, it went against the social norm or expectation of being independent. First, I discussed it with Mum as I knew she would need to be on side. Her first reaction was no issue, but that school would need to be persuaded. We agreed I would ask to be fed for a half term as I had been off a lot and wanted their help for me to feel well again. I sat down and did an email to my key worker saying why I needed help, what I thought the benefits would be, and would school support me for 6 weeks. Because school didn't like me to be absent, they said yes. Some of the school care team weren't happy, as it was more work for them. Towards the end of term, the school staff kept saying things like only another couple of weeks and you'll be feeding yourself again. I just kept quiet and smiled. I was collecting my evidence to make this a permanent change. At the end of 6 weeks, I put on weight. I was happier and had more energy. I was enjoying life. But I'd also discovered other things. I was sleeping better, and I was able to focus better on schoolwork. I was able to do more of the little things that helped me be independent. I kept a list of all these changes and benefits, which grew to over 2 pages long. Luckily for me, I had a pediatrician review during that school holiday. I took my list of benefits and told her what I'd done, and she was amazed. For the first time ever, I had put on sufficient weight to be off the bottom of the growth chart. What she then did was write to school and tell them I needed to be fed ongoing for my health. Goal achieved. So actually, this was one time I did use someone to speak for me, but in a different way. I was determined to make this change happen and knew I needed professional help to make my wish a reality. So, I knew what I wanted. I knew why. I did my research and I self-advocated with someone who could make my wishes happen. The feedback from school was that it wouldn't have happened if health hadn't told them they had to do it. The upshot is that overnight my quality of life improved, and I've never looked back. Do we have any questions about self-determination?
Oh, we've got one. We've just got one come through in the chat. We won't be a second.
It's from me again. Oh, there's Dean as well.
Mm,
You can do Dean's first if you want. It's fine.
mm.
Thank you, Miriam. Thank you, Beth. Beth, it just made me feel really angry then about what you said about, you know, when you were at school and the problems that you were having. And I think this is quite a common problem, actually, even now for some people. And, you know, I mean, food is a basic right, and, you know, it's and feel healthy, you know, particularly if you're eating the right food. And I'm just sorry that you know, that you had that, but I'm glad that you were able to self-advocate and actually say to those people, well, you know, you said, oh, only another week now, and then you'll be doing it again. Like special school mentality of some, you know, sort of institutionalized staff, if you like. You know, I'm glad that you fought through it and that it didn't knock your confidence and your determination. So, yeah, well done on that one. Well done on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Beth's going to program her answer now to Miriam's question, if that's okay. Do you want to talk through your question or Beth preparing her answer? And then we
So I think that what I'm finding phenomenal, Beth, is your mindset, your positive attitude and your self-belief. And I'm just curious, and I know there may not be a definitive answer, but as to how much is the way your parents raised you, what their attitude towards your abilities and potentials were, and how much is it from within yourself that you always had it. And it may be that you don't know the answer, but I just feel that I wanted to ask the question.
I don't really know, but I do know my parents always treated me no different to anyone else. They made sure even with my disability, I always got the same opportunities as my able-bodied peers, even if they were there in the background.
Beth's just going to move on to Emma's question now. If that's okay, that's from the chat. That is, how important is it to have a clear goal?
I guess I was just listening, Beth, and admiring how even at such a young age you were so you were able to be as clear and specific about what you needed and had the knowledge of how to record that information to gather the evidence, something that I'm only learning in later life. So I was just wondering about it.
Crucially important, but I had adult role models with CP and AAC to show me the way and what my future could hold.
My fourth tip is about communication. Communication is like a golden thread that underpins everything when it comes to advocacy. This is often the hardest thing of all. We know what we want from life. We know our rights. We are determined to make things happen, but how? From the examples I've already shared, you can see I have approached advocacy in different ways. It is important to find the right tool for the right situation with the right person. I've written personal letters, drafted emails, and delivered presentations. I've tackled big issues head on, and I've used intermediaries like the pediatrician to add weight to get appropriate action. Particularly when I was playing bocce with Great Britain, I used my blog to address issues I wanted to resolve or share my point of view. I chose this as a medium because I knew the staff support team, my teammates, and others in the wider bocce world read what I wrote. One example was a post about how it is sometimes easier to say yes when you really want to say no. The result was the performance director sought me out. She told me she had read my blog, and if there was ever a time when I felt I wanted to say no, but felt I couldn't, then I must go and see her. That one event gave me the confidence to speak out more and stand my ground. When I was 15, I was quite ill, and I needed to find a way to communicate with others what the causes of this had been. It was a time I was off school and in and out of hospital for several weeks. It's a long story, but the causes were mostly stress, bereavements, and fear for the future when my parents weren't around to support me. It was a traumatic time, and I couldn't easily verbalize what I felt. My mum has lots of patience. Together we did lots of different activities, which I then later used with school to explain what had happened and self-advocate what I needed. This included tearing pictures and visuals from magazines to create an emotions board. Mum writing down each time I mentioned a situation from school, some of which seemed trivial, but then helping me to visually theme them to demonstrate when I felt out of control and why. We brainstormed what made me happy and what made me sad. We discussed who were my safe people and places, and loads more. These were powerful tools in self-advocating for change because school were seemingly not aware that blanket policies sometimes had unexpected consequences. On my website, there are some videos about how I communicate. For instance, when I started university, I made one that went out to all staff who would meet me and the students on my course about just this topic. Because of staff feedback, this has gone out again at the beginning of every year as it makes new staff feel more comfortable. Imagine, because I have a power chair, hearing aids and a speech impairment I'm perceived to be scary. An important skill to learn is how to give and receive feedback. This was something I mentioned earlier. It can be hard to give or receive negative feedback. Within my team, we use a technique we call talk it out. We talk informally evening after dinner about the day, what went well, and what might be improved. We give each other feedback. Then we talk about what is coming up for the next day and how we need to plan. I find it a useful technique to advocate for what needs to happen, and because it is part of our routines, then it is less confrontational if anything needs to be discussed. Something else I've done ever since I was little is practice new situations, and what I might say. This is a bit like being an athlete, where you practice the same skill repeatedly until you can execute it without thinking. For every new situation, familiarization helps. Again, for sport, I like to arrive early to suss out the venue. I learned beforehand what was expected for every stage of a competition, and I always had a plan. Because of my communication needs, preparation always matters. I've found having the opportunity to anticipate questions and responses that might come up gives me greater confidence when it matters. Over time, there have been less new situations, but the result is now that I have some standard things that help me when there is someone I've not met before. For instance, I have a summary health sheet to give at new health appointments. That means I don't have to spend time going over my history. Then, because I always prepare for everything if I'm going to the doctor, I have a pre-programmed list of my symptoms and questions. If I'm going to the Communication Matters Board meeting, I read all the papers beforehand. Then I pre-program any questions and the things I particularly want to say. I do some work at the University of York on the social work courses. One of the things I do when I lead the communication module is make sure they understand the value of service users knowing what the meeting is about beforehand. Then, what the benefits is of sharing in advance the key questions they will be asking and making sure they give time to everyone to make considered responses. Personally, I don't do well if something is sprung on me because I like to formulate my thoughts, and often what is said in these types of meetings is important for our futures. We are all different. If I'm unhappy, I also write poetry, and I share this with my mum. I find it an easier way to share my emotions than facing them head on. It's a way of opening up to discuss an issue that otherwise might be tricky to raise. There is no right or wrong way to communicate. Each of us needs to find what works best for us in each different situation, whether we want to advocate for ourselves or have the support of others. But what I would recommend is when you can take the time to plan and prepare, maybe write lists, and consider what medium will work best when advocating for yourself. Before we move on to the final tip, do we have any questions?
We've just got a question from Becky. I think we've got a couple of them, so Beth's just going to get her answer ready to that now. So the question is, Beth, do you think having a scientific brain, having an interest in science, and having a degree in that field helped you to be able to collect evidence and present it clearly in a way people understand, as well as give others feedback, because this is what is expected in social research? So Beth's just going to prepare an answer and then we'll move on to the next one after that.
Excellent question, Becky. Yes, I suppose so, as I'm better informed because I know in detail about social norms.
And we're just going to move on to the next question, Becky, you've asked, which is, do you have any strategies for dealing with situations where people have sprung a question on you and you wish you had been told in advance?
Sometimes, like tonight, it's fine as it's contextual, but in uni I am bombarded by listening and watching. I freeze. I don't think we can ask questions in advance all the time, as this is human interaction generally, but in some cases I would ask the questions beforehand.
Brilliant. The final section is about reflection. I've done this all my life because my mum encouraged me from an early age to ask 3 questions. They were also questions that became part of my life as a sports person and really helped me to review my performance. These 3 questions are: what went well? What might be improved? Then, is there anything I would change about what happened? The what went well might be that I had done my research. I had planned well what I wanted to say. I made my points, and the person I was talking to listened and then acted. The what might be improved could be a range of things, from not having anticipated the questions that might be raised, through to there might have been a better time to raise my concerns. The anything I would change about what happened again can be quite varied. It might be considering if I could have said something in a better way, perhaps more diplomatically, or that I might have had more confidence if I had role-played the situation with a trusted staff member before the meeting. In other words, having a practice run can help me to manage expectations of myself and others in advocacy situation. Being reflective is about being open-minded and willing to learn. Not being critical of yourself, but realistic about what went well. Being determined and resilient. Considering what might be improved and what you might change. The upshot of this is an action list for next time of things to consider when advocating successfully for yourself and others. That brings us to the end of my presentation.